line. Over there, over there. Send the word over there. That the Yanks are coming, the Yanks are coming. The drums coming everywhere. So prepare, say a prayer. Send the word to beware. We'll be over, we're coming over, and we won't come back till it's over, over there, over there, over there. Send the word over.
Hey everybody, this is Joshua Littrell again with Veterans for Cannabis. We appreciate you joining us here on our podcast today. I'm extremely honored to bring in Dr. Zac Pilossoph. And Zac, I can't say thank you enough for taking the time out just to spend some time with us today. We'll talk about cannabis access. You're a veterinarian, and I really want to understand what the endocannabinoid system means for us humans, and then we'll talk about it for animals and really get into that. So Zac, just want to say hello and thank you for joining us today. If you won't mind to just take a little time and introduce yourself.
Yeah, absolutely, Josh. First, obviously, absolute pleasure to be here. Meeting you was, truly an experience, and just the amount of effort that you're putting into developing the truth of this world is just really, something that's admirable and commendable. And, I'm just happy to be able to do that kind of where I am considered more of a specialist as well, being a veteran now. Add a couple of letters, I'm a veterinarian, so, it's almost like a match made in heaven, so it's great. So I'm really excited to be here. Absolute pleasure to be invited, and so just wanted to say that. So my beginnings in terms of this industry in general started with my frustrations in the clinic. No different than I feel like a lot of doctors in the human field, but it really started with me on my path towards my initial path of career choice was to be a neurosurgeon for animals, and of course, as we found out in the neurology field for humans, there is a huge potential for what is thought to be use of cannabis in multiple ways in neuromuscular conditions, primarily neurologic, and then neuromuscular, and then obviously musculoskeletal.
Absolutely.
So the questions were no different in the animal field versus the human field. Every single day I would get bombarded with questions about, people that tried self-medicating their pets, or people that were considering it, or people that heard their neighbor say something about it. In general, it was no different, again, than the beginnings of the new wave of medical cannabis therapeutics in humans. And
well, Zac, do you find that people are really open to utilizing cannabis with their pets, or are they kind of closed off to that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that everyone is very aware that there is something there to be had. And I think that with more and more understanding that the side effect or adverse profile of a cannabis-based product versus anything else in this world that is a basic pharmaceutical is starting to become neutralized. And so I do think there is a huge interest in the field of what would be considered the pet cannabis industry, with the CBD market being much greater in that area versus the general cannabis, where you do have higher levels of THC and or of psychoactive compounds. Not that CBD isn't psychoactive, but more psychoactive than that. I think there is a large use, as we've seen in reflection of the market share of the, quote unquote CBD pet industry.
Well, Doc, I hear what you're saying, and I absolutely believe in it wholeheartedly. The one thing that, I always get caught up in, and with our own Veterans for Cannabis, industrial hemp CBD-based product, is I see people that will come buy a product from us to try it on their pet first, and then they see how effective it is on their pet, and then they'll turn around and come back and buy it next time for themselves, plus their pet too, right? So have you experienced that at all in your practice?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So, the first thing I definitely have to declare is the reason why there has been even more of a pushback or a delay in the onset of understanding and acceptance of cannabis for pets in general is because in the practice setting, in anything where there is considered a veterinary client-patient relationship, it is still illegal to even discuss the use of cannabis at all.
Wait, Doc. Hold on. You're telling me it is illegal for a veterinarian to actually have a conversation with their patient, even though it's a four-legged patient, and they're talking to the patient's parent about cannabis? Is that correct?
Absolutely correct. So California is the only state which finally has done something about this to get a bill passed that would allow veterinarians to discuss cannabis. Nothing about recommending, nothing about dose formulation, side effect profile, just about discussing what cannabis is. The rest of the country, according to what I've studied very hard and obviously have looked for ways in which I can do it, which I still am not comfortable doing, the rest of the country must abide by the law of the federal government and of what the ABMA supports, which is that you are not allowed to discuss cannabis in your practice.
Wow. You know, Dr. Pilossoph, I'll tell you right now, it's crazy that what you're talking about sounds so very familiar to us in our veteran community, because unfortunately, the Veterans Administration has the same exact stance that it sounds like you all are kind of handcuffed with as well. So the VA doesn't allow the physicians to, one, make a recommendation to veterans for cannabis as a treatment option, and then two, they just in the last year or so opened it up so that we could actually have a dialogue with our physicians. So we're kind of lucky in that aspect that we're able to finally talk with physicians about cannabis access. However, that's few and far between. I do have to say that with a caveat that many times the Veterans Administration physicians just don't know anything about cannabis, so they won't even have that conversation with their patient. And you have a physician like yourself that is just unbelievable in your empathy for pets, your ability to treat animals, that has extreme level of knowledge of cannabis, and you're telling us that you can't even have that conversation with your patients.
Yeah, absolutely, and it is. It's disheartening, and it's hard as a physician or a veterinarian or someone that wants to help treat conditions that are easily treatable. You know, the conditions that are palliative just as much, but especially when you're thinking and you're looking and you're saying, I know there's something out there, and you see something suffering in front of you, and you know that there's an option that maybe has less side effects. You know, of course, we still, because of the restrictions, don't have enough evidence. Of course, that's true. But if there's anything to fall back on, which I wish we could finally be understanding, is that the side effect profile of trying this alternative option, you know, is far less of a risk than what we have sitting on the shelves every single day. And so it's just that mindset that will hopefully allow us to overcome this. But at this time, you're right. It is nothing more than a handicapped situation. We are being handcuffed, and you know it's difficult, but it's of course something we're gonna use positivity and education to overcome as time goes on.
Oh, absolutely. I couldn't agree with that more. I want to get into that education in just a moment, but I want to ask you kind of a philosophical or a moral question, if you will. So, from a moral standpoint, Dr. Pilossoph, tell us how it feels to know that something is there that is effective, like cannabis as a medicine, and know that you can't actually make a recommendation to your patients. How does that make you feel as a person, not as a doctor, but as a person?
Right. Yeah. So to put in perspective, the fact that I'm technically allowed, and anyone is allowed really, to make more recommendations to a human being in which I'm not, you know, technically licensed, to make consultation recommendations to a human more than I can, which for a creature on the earth in which I've gone to school for 8 to 10 years of, it's perplexing. And, you know, it's not something to get down about. It's something to use as a driving force of understanding and to keep you coming out every single day, knowing that, you know, giving up in the face of adversity is not going to get us anywhere, and understanding that there are those that are feeling the same way. We're all obviously a little hesitant to move as fast as we'd like to, but there are those that are willing to keep their eyes open and to really understand, you know, it's a moral principle, it's a medical principle, and it's an evolutionary principle to just understand that despite the adversity, you have to come out knowing that remaining positive in the end is going to allow for those that are feeling comfortable with understanding there may be a future for this to keep going at it. So yes, is it difficult?
I am clapping right now for you, because I want to first applaud you for that. The ability to say that don't get down and let's get up. Let's keep pushing forward. I tell you right now that that's exactly what we say in our veteran community all the time. And I know you and I have talked about, you know, vets for vets. These are veterinarians for veterans. And let's really focus on bringing that to the forefront as a great bond and relationship that we're trying to make happen. And that's what we're working so hard on. And what you just said, by don't get down, keep pushing up, keep working hard, That's so amazing and so driving for us from a force standpoint.
So no, it is. It's exactly what you said. It's about change. And so how do we change the entire principle when right now all of us are isolated entities? Well, we bring all of our entities together. And every discipline and every subsector of where there is subjective data of cannabis benefits, that is how we can start to change the tides. And so ultimately what that means is that, to give an example of one argument against it, is that there's no research out there. Well, if you do a search online, a free search for research on animal cannabis use, you can easily find hundreds, if not thousands, of articles that are maybe not considered end double-blinded placebo studies, but you can find phase 1 and phase 2 studies that were done in order to then test for phase 3.
Hold on a second. Are you really serious? There are phase 1 and phase 2 studies that have been done? Tell me that's here in the United States.
Yes, everywhere in the world. Every single corner of the world, whether you're in America, whether you're in Canada, whether you're in Israel, whether you're in all the other countries that are showing some progressive input on this, there are studies that are done that are not, in the eyes of our country, considered double-blinded placebo-controlled studies that are at the final level strictly for animals, which we do have a few of now, thank goodness. But what is considered in our eyes, of our government's eyes, as being acceptable is limited, true. But the actual studies that are done are not limited, and they are in the hundreds of thousands.
So, Doc, where can somebody get that information from if they're looking for it?
You can use Google Scholar online. I before I did my talk in Miami a couple of months ago, I literally, to test it, I went on Google Scholar and just searched cannabis, canine, and dog, and I got over 100 studies right there, sifting through, obviously, because the thousands come up. But if you sift through, you can find easily studies that were done, whether they were toxicology studies, physiologic studies, whether they were subjective studies. It's not hard to find stuff. It's just a matter of that the effort has to be put in, and you have to collect the data yourself. But when you do a search on your own, aside from the study that was put out of Cornell for osteoarthritis and the study that was done out of Colorado State for seizure control, those are the two studies right now that are accepted in the veterinary field as specific animal-related studies. But other than that, they are not, quote unquote, what we would consider a animal-specific study. Yet they are done on animals from mice to dogs.
Wow, that's crazy. So I want to ask your opinion on something. I saw, I think it was a study that came out of Harvard or somewhere the other day that they finally found a lethal dose for CBD. Do you know anything about that? And if you do, can you tell us a little bit more about that?
I can't put input on that, actually, to tell you the truth. I did not see that come out, so point of interest to look into, I guess. So
yeah, absolutely. So I'll give the listeners a high level of it. So it came out the other day that it was a study done on mice, and it was something like 42,000 grams is what that mouse had to ingest to actually find a lethal dose of CBD. Insane. And to put that into perspective for our listeners, that would be 99.9% pure CBD crystalline, like 2 pounds of it that you would have to ingest at one point in time to be a lethal dose. And that's just crazy. I mean, but it is good, I think, in the fact that, for years now, we've been telling people there was no lethal dose associated with cannabis. And it's one of the only things in the world that there is no lethal dose associated with it, right? So it was good to see that information was coming out saying that, yes, there is a lethal dose, even though it's really not something that's achievable. There is a lethal dose to it. So just like we know, water, there's a lethal dose to water, lethal dose to sugar. Anything that you intake into your body, you can die from if you take too much of it in. So I just thought it was a really good thing to bring up. So I want to kind of shift gears a little bit. You mentioned your speech in Miami. Tell us a little bit about what you do on a speaking realm.
Yeah, absolutely. So what I've come to understand, again, obviously, is that when you make waves, you're going to get attention no matter what. So I have really tried to avoid the I would say the tendency to become biased in any way possible. Obviously, you're going to become biased towards the plan itself, but in terms of associating with sides, I really try to do my best to remain as neutral as possible. And in that comes power and value. And so what I've done so